All right, I think we're probably pretty much all in. So I think we're just going to get started. So first off, thank you all so much for coming. My name is Emily Burnham. I'm a reporter, feature writer with the Bangor Daily News. I actually had the pleasure of getting an early advance copy of Gigi's book over the spring and reading it. And I had a great chat with her for an article we ran when it just the same week it came. I believe it was the week it came out. Maybe it was a week. Yeah, it was around that time. So you guys are really in for a treat because it was really a fascinating book to read and really gave me more insight into the place that I'm from, which is rare because I always think I know everything, and then somebody says something or writes something that gives me a whole new perspective. So, I think you will all find the same thing. So, first off, we're very excited to once again be partnering with Left Bank Books on this event to celebrate the release of Gigi's book, Downeast, Five Maine Girls and the Unseen Story of Rural America. Joining Gigi tonight is John Zavodny, who is the president of Maine Seacoast Mission, an amazing organization that works with coastal Maine communities, and an organization that Gigi worked with quite extensively in the process of writing a book, which I'm sure she'll talk about. And John will be moderating this discussion, kind of asking some questions, and then he'll open up to questions and answers after the main discussion is over. So for those of you in the audience tonight who are subscribers to the Bangor Daily News, thank you so much for your support. We love having you here, and it's great to see you. For those of you who this may be your first time coming to a BDN event, thank you, welcome. And if this is something you like, if you like what we do with the BDN, please consider subscribing. It's very easy. There's a subscribe now button right on our website, bangordailynews.com, and we'd love to have you a part of our community. And also, we have to give a major shout out to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, who is our tourmaline sponsor for this event. They've been an amazing partner for several years now for our events and helping us bring the most interesting people and the best conversations to our community of readers and subscribers. Also, we've worked with the National Digital Equity Center on this project. So as a reminder, this event is being recorded and we will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the discussion. If you have a question, please use the chat function in Zoom to pose it, and John will ask it later on in this meetup. So once again, thank you to Left Bank Books, thank you to Harvard Pilgrim, thank you to Gigi and John, and I will stop talking. If you want to purchase a copy of Downeast, you can get one from Left Bank Books, of course, open 7 days a week in beautiful Belfast, Maine, and they will ship it to you if you can't get there right now. So without further ado, I will pass this off to John, and again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you all for joining us here. I've had the pleasure of spending a little bit of time with Gigi and doing one other event where we actually were live, which was remarkable in its own right. But we spent time talking together, thinking about this remarkable book. So it's been a real joy. It's been a real pleasure getting to know Gigi. And I will just say at the outset that as somebody who works with coastal Maine communities and rural families, I admit I was a little hesitant when I saw the title and the premise of the book, because I know that, somebody who is from away and, isn't didn't grow up in the Downeast community has a lot to prove when they engage this subject. And I got to say, within a page, 2 pages, I was hooked. And by the end of the book, I was so impressed and so convinced that Gigi is a really loving and respectful teller of the story of these young women from Downeast, Maine. So those are my cards on the table. That's where I'm coming from. I have nothing but admiration for Gigi and the work she's done. So we're going to get to some questions, but we thought it would be best to really set the tone by letting the book set the tone. And Gigi's got a short reading that she's going to offer. I think it's a great selection that really, it comes early in the book, and it really, I think it sets the tone for the book. I think it will do a great job of setting the tone for our discussion as well. So Gigi, say hi, first of all, to these nice people, and then please share your reading.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And thank you all for being here. Thank you to Emily and to the Bangor Daily News and Left Bank Books. John, I really so appreciate your words, and they're so meaningful, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight. As John said, what I'm just going to do to start is a very short reading. I'll set the stage, I'll read, and then we'll go from there. So the scene is 2016, Downeast, Maine. We're an hour north of Bar Harbor, up the coast, not far from Bar Harbor, and yet a world away in so many respects. The towns there, as many of you know, are very small, a few hundred people each. And the local high school basketball team, Narragansett High, has its girls going to the state championship, the Class C North State Championship. They are the underdogs, and they, against all odds, right, are there at the state championship, and they win the game. And from there, we read. When the game ended, the roars were deafening, and the night-long celebration began. Every one of Harrington's 950 residents felt as if they had carried home the coveted gold ball. Along with neighbors from the adjoining towns of Addison, Cherryfield, Columbia, and Millbridge, they had made the 5-hour round-trip drive to Augusta Civic Center. They had followed their hometown girls since the season's late November start, from the gym at Narragansett, where most of them had gone to school years earlier, to Searsport, Baileyville, Jonesport, and other hamlets along the Downeast corridor. As the season chugged along and the girls ground their way toward an 18-2 season, the people here found themselves forgetting, for a couple of hours each week, about where they'd find the money for the unpaid heating bill, or how many times they'd fixed the leaking roof on their aging double wide, about the way the money wasn't coming in so fast once blueberry raking season had come and gone, or why this year's lobster yield wasn't even close to what they needed ever since Donnie had succumbed to the lure of fentanyl, about where they'd go without their neighbors knowing to stock up on food for the long winter that lay ahead. They found themselves forgetting, and they cheered for the squad with an average height of 5'5". They cheered for the multi-talented coach, Olivia Marshall, who gave the girls something to strive for on and off the court. And they cheered for the possibility that this once robust set of communities could beat the odds in other ways. Because if a group of underdog girls could lift themselves up from the valley of the overlooked, surely they could too.
Thank you, Gigi. That passage sets a tone so nicely, I think, for for the book and for the successes and the challenges and triumphs, for these young women. I want to just start by asking you maybe the most obvious question, which to me is, how did you find this story, or how did the story find you?
Well, it was a bit of a journey. I am not a native Mainer. I was actually born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, an urban kid from a big Greek immigrant family, and spent most of my, certainly all of my youth, and then most of my adult life up until I got married, working in urban policy issues, living in urban places. But about 15 years ago, my husband and I made the decision to move to northern New England, and we started to raise our now 9-year-old daughter in New Hampshire and in Maine. And what I was seeing as I really looked around and thought about what I had learned in my own policy experience, particularly working with young people and in schools, what I was seeing around me wasn't quite matching up to that dominant narrative that we keep hearing about rural America. We hear these stories, these media accounts, these books that largely focus on hopelessness and despair in rural America. And yes, there are challenges, and I know we'll talk about those this evening in places like Downeast, Washington County, but there are also other things going on, and I wanted to explore that. And so I set out to do that. And actually, my first step, as John knows, was to sit down with John's predecessor, Scott Planning, who was then the Seacoast mission president, and he pointed me in the direction of Downeast, Washington County. He said, go up the road about an hour, and what you will find there might surprise you. And he was right.
Yeah, and I would just point out that Scott is here with us.
Scott, I see you right there.
He's incognito as Marcia, but that's him. I can tell from here that's Scott.
And I want to add and say hello to Scott. And he and the Seacoast mission, whose reins have now been handed to John, as Emily said, really played an integral part in the path I took towards reporting on not only the communities, but these 5 young women for the past 4 years or so.
It's great. So in your, in the process of developing the book and doing the research, I imagine that you had some notion of how the story was going to come together and what the overarching themes were going to be as you entered the work. But was there a moment, was there a story, was there an experience with one of these young women that just really kind of crystallized it for you and set in motion the overall structure and the kind of narrative arc that the book would eventually take?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. There were actually a number of moments, but the very first moment was very early on. And that was before I even had landed on these 5 young women who really gave me their trust, and I'm so grateful to them for that. Their willingness to hang out with me for 4 years. It's quite something. And that was when I first was able to sit down with these young folks. Again, thanks to Scott opening a couple of doors with the school superintendent, with the school principal at Narraguagus High, who were just incredibly open and welcoming to me. They in turn let me sit down with a bunch of the young students at Narraguagus, and I did some informal focus groups with them and kind of just talked with them. And there was a moment when I realized that something really interesting was going on with the young women at Narraguagus and in the community. That in many ways, they were excelling, I think in a lot of ways beyond what people might have expected in academics, in athletics, in leadership, inside and outside of the school. And I said to myself, there's something here, there is a story here. And not only from the perspective of something interesting and special going on with these young women, but from the perspective of all the books on rural America that have come out in recent years, and there have been quite a few. None of them has focused on the lens and voices of contemporary young women in small towns. And I thought, there is a voice and a set of voices that is yearning to be heard and that can contribute to the broader conversation and the broader narrative of rural America.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I gotta give you props for saying very, very fluidly Narraguagus. Just rolls right out of your mouth. It's clear that you've spent a little time there.
I was well trained, absolutely.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not to this point yet myself, but if I'm not mistaken, the more advanced pronunciation is just Guegas.
Vegas, you
I,
got it,
I've
exactly.
heard that. I mean, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe folks can correct me, but I've heard some of the young people call it Guegas. So I'm like, someday I will
Gotta be in
aspire
the
to that
club, right?
status. That's right. So I wanted to, you know, clearly the focus is on young women, and I think, you know, unapologetically so. You know, it's an interesting story. I think the relevance is clear. But you spend a little bit of time. You spend part of a chapter in the book talking about the circumstance of young men. And, you know, in those of us who have been in education know that you know, young men are really struggling in higher education, you know, in high school. There is an emerging crisis around young men. You felt the need to spend some of those precious pages talking about the young men. Can you speak to that, say why and what it was that compelled you to spend time on that?
Yeah, this is just such an important strand and such an important part of the conversation in the broader set of issues, I think, that demands focus. And I spent, you know, I spent a lot of time with these young women, their families, and with the broader community. And they were so welcoming. Everyone I asked, everyone I interviewed, connected with or within Downeast, Washington County, I asked the same question. And that was, what do you think is going on with the boys? Because there is a sense, and I think, unfortunately, a reality that a number of the young men, there is a cohort of young men who are struggling. And honestly, I don't think that anyone really has the answer. I think that the Narraguagus principle, and we use pseudonyms in the book. Those of you, though, who are from the area, who may be on this, will know immediately who I'm talking about. But she, I think she came closest to it, and I shared a little bit of that conversation in the book when she said, you know, I think we spend a lot of time and energy, and rightly so, working to lift our girls up. But perhaps inadvertently, and I'm paraphrasing her, perhaps inadvertently in the process, we may be giving some of these young men the signal that we are pushing them down in the process. And it is food for thought. And I think there are probably a number of different things going on socioeconomically, in terms of skill training, in terms of jobs lost, and what is available to these young men. And I think that there are a lot of strands that it would be really, really good to dig deep into. I at one point said that perhaps it's worth, you know, exploring another book if they'll have me back, because I think it's worthy of that. And I know we're mostly talking about the takeaways from spending time with these young women, but there is a lot there as well.
Sure, thank you. And you know, this notion, I know you kind of, you know, you're being a little bit glib with saying, you know, if they'll have me back. But boy, you know, the fact that they had you at all is just so impressive. And I think it's worth, you know, taking a moment and talking about that access that you had, which is really remarkable. And it's clear from the stories, it's clear from the details and the struggles that these young women and their family shared with you, that there was a lot of trust there. Can you speak to that process and how you go about building trust with folks who have sometimes difficult stories to tell?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and maybe even get into one or two of just touch on one or two of those stories in the process.
Please.
You know, I think that the way in which I gained trust, and there was a process involved in doing that. perhaps more than anything was to not be invasive, to be open, to let these 5 young women know from the very start that we were in this together. And the best thing that I could do was get out of the way and let these stories unfold. And we did a lot of talking, and at every step of the way, I tried to share with them where I was going. And there was a mutuality to that. And so as the time went on, we really gained what I truly believe is a friendship, and it became a process that was almost a joint process in the end. And I'm very, very grateful to them for that, because they really opened themselves up, and they opened their lives up and their stories up, and their families as well, and their peers and their broader community. And, you know, as John sort of hinted at, you know, a couple of these young women, each of them faced challenges in their own way. One in particular, Willow, has had a very, very difficult life. From childhood, she was raised in a family, in a home where there was significant substance abuse, physical abuse. She moved 7 times before she was 8. She went to live with her grandparents, and at one point, her grandmother was sent to prison. And she really, really struggled, in a sense, with that piece of her life. And yet, she was not a victim in the end. And I watched her go through this process of dealing with things in the moment. And I was so struck by how self-aware and how self-possessed and how resilient this young woman is and was. And I thought that this piece of it, and this piece that I saw also in each of the other young women, of true grit and true strength, and optimism in the face of challenges, was remarkable. And it became a representation of what I saw and continue to see in the broader Downeast Washington community, and I believe in other rural communities. And that is strength in community, leaning on each other, tremendous social capital, and optimism in the face of challenges. A story that is so rarely told when we talk about rural America.
Thank you. I think that's wonderful. And I think maybe that's a great segue to share some of the images. I know you have some pictures that
Yes.
you're willing to share, and I would love to invite you to do that now. I'm thinking of this as like that section in the book, you know, in the middle where you have the pictures. So this is just a bonus for all the folks who are joining here online. This is that little part in the middle of the book.
That's right. So I am going to share, and I will talk a little bit about some of the images, and it'll allow me to introduce a couple of the other young women in the book, a couple of the other characters, as we say. So this first image is McKenna, who is a lobster fisherman. She has been fishing. She's been wanting to fish since she could walk. She has been fishing truly since she was 8, following in the footsteps of her father and her brothers. And she goes on to become a lobster boat fishing captain by the time she's 17. She is, in many ways, as those of you who know, a trailblazer. And she is really right there with the boys. She is a spitfire. She's also a softball pitching phenom. And she is now captaining her own boat, and also going to college at the same time for a business degree. That is her family's wharf, Holt Wharf. And this family really did not come from a legacy family. They built this from the ground up, and there they are, and they're doing it together. And it is a wonderful story of strength and success, and working together as a family and supporting each other as a family, and with the help of the community as well. This is Audrey, the Lady Knights 2016 star of the basketball team, and the team itself was a remarkable team and led by a remarkable coach. Speaking of trailblazers, Olivia Marshall in the book, who is a lobster boat captain herself, and is a mentor to many of these young women, including Audrey and McKenna. Audrey is here at the scene of the championship. She goes on to earn a coveted scholarship at Bates College and makes a really interesting decision after 1 year of being there to return home, to enroll at UMaine, to transfer, because she wants to live in the community she comes from. She wants to be a speech pathologist, and the Bates curriculum is a mismatch as a liberal arts curriculum to what she is interested in and passionate about and committed to. And she's very much a leader in the community and an example of what I'm talking about when I say that these young women are committed to their community. They want to stay and build. And that is a great example. This is the basketball team, the 2016 Class C state champions, all together, and Olivia Marshall is on the far end there, the lobster boat captain and coach. Blueberry farming, anyone who's from the area knows this scene well. It's just a little example of what goes on. And I had the good fortune of taking part in being a sternman on a lobster boat with McKenna and with Olivia Marshall at various times, of going out with in the blueberry barrens and breaking blueberries and being a part of that, and of hanging out with these young women in their favorite places, in their workplaces, in their school settings, and really getting a feel. Staying isn't settling. This is a sign that struck me so powerfully when I walked into the hall of Narraguagus High School for the very first time. And I went back many times. And it is, I think, a great symbol of that counter narrative. And there is that sign, and underneath the sign, there are all of these pictures with little blurbs about young people who have graduated from Narraguagus and made a decision and made a choice to stay. And while for some young people, the choice to leave is the right one and a good one, for many, there is an option for staying and for building and for remaining a part of the community that is not simply about being, quote, stuck. And I thought that was an important piece of the story and an important piece for folks to see and remember. Just closing on these slides, the young woman Willow that I mentioned and talked about, who had really so many challenges in her young life, she is a photographer. And she was mentored by the art teacher at the school, who Britt Francis in the book, lovingly known as Franny by her students. Willow was mentored by Franny, and Franny and other teachers play a powerful role in these young women's and young men's lives. And Willow has gone on to continue to photograph and do so very beautifully images of Downeast, the place she loves. And if anyone, I'll continue to show her photos, if anyone you would think might have a reason to want to escape from Downeast, it might be Willow or the Willows of the area. Willow said to me, not once, but many times, I could never leave Downeast because it is the place I love. I am of it and it is of me. And she is so bonded to the natural surroundings, to the community that has helped sustain her, and to the future that she really believes she has there, that it's a really poignant and layered story, and I think an important one.
Great, thank you. So we're coming up on a period where Alyssa is going to join us, and she's going to read some of your questions from the chat. And so I would invite you over the next couple minutes to think about what you'd like to ask Gigi, and put it right there in the chat. And Alyssa will come on and she'll moderate some of those questions for us. While you're doing that, Gigi, I was struck by your choice to include a connection to your Greek background. And you mentioned it earlier in this discussion, and it really, well, I'll let you tell it. Why did you feel compelled to do that? And what is the connection that you felt because of your background?
So as I said earlier, I come from this urban background, Brooklyn born and raised. My family is largely an immigrant family, and my mom in particular came from Greece when she was 14. And she came from a very small village named Petrina in the Spartan area of Greece. And it is a place that as children, my sister and brother and I and our family and our cousins returned to many times in summers and came to know. And it struck me that little village in Greece, so far afield, is in some ways so very similar to some of the things that I was seeing and experiencing down east. And that even more than that, as an extension of that many of the values and sensibilities that I grew up with as the child of Greek immigrants, and my cousins, my brother, my sister, and I grew up with, that there were connections to what I was seeing in these small communities in Downeast, Washington County. And I thought to myself, they are so different in so many ways geographically, and yet there are similarities. And I wanted to explore those similarities, and I wanted to explore those linkages from far off in this small village in Greece to my own upbringing in Brooklyn to these towns in Washington County, and what are those connections? And I went from there.
That's great. Thank you. So Emily asked me to facilitate the question and answer part for the chat. So I'll do that, and I'll pepper in some, and that'll give me a chance to kind of follow up on some of the things that I'm fascinated by as well.
John, sorry, I do have a question that was emailed to us as well.
Oh, great.
If you want me to start with that one, and then you
sure,
can go
that's great.
Okay, great. This question, Gigi, comes from John. He asks, please compare the perception of small town life as seen by those who claim born and raised here versus those from away. There are people who choose to move to Downeast communities drawn by the special beauty of the region. Do those who have spent their entire lives in a town see that beauty the same way as those who have traveled more widely? Do they understand the social linkages the same way? Do these differences create a wall between those who have worked hard at supporting a family in the local community and those who moved to town after having achieved affluence somewhere else?
Great. So there's a lot there, and it's a wonderful set of questions. I'll try to tackle some of that at least. So I think there is, so let me say at the outset that I would never, as someone from away, right? I would never want to presume to get into the mind of those who have been born and raised, particularly multi-generational members of the Downeast Washington County community, nor of any rural community or broader community. Having said that, this strain of conversation did come up, and in the conversations that I had, and in the observations that I made, I came away with a few observations. One is this notion that you mentioned, John, of do they see the beauty in the same way? And it's interesting because I remember talking in particular with McKenna and her mom. And McKenna is the lobster fisherman. And McKenna said to me at one point, it almost feels, you'd think it would almost feel routine, right? To be surrounded by this incredible beauty and to be a part of this, right? But she said, I look out and I every day just marvel at it. And she said, and I think to myself, how lucky I am that I am not sitting behind a desk, that my office is the sea, right? And I just thought it was so striking, right? The level of appreciation that while it is so much a part of her routine, she does feel it and see it. And I saw that as well with Willow. I saw that with every one of the girls, but I saw it particularly expressed with Willow, who found this, who had to find an escape, right, from the troubles that she lived with. And she found this wharf that she worked at. And she would go and drive when she was old enough to drive late at night and lie out on the planks and look up at the stars and out. And this was her church, in a sense. This was her world and her way of processing. And I think those couple of examples give you a sense of the way in which there is a very strong appreciation, even if it's not always expressed in the day-to-day. And I know there were other parts of the conversation, but one other thing that struck me was sort of jumping off that was that you do have, as you noted, John, that you do have a mix, right? You have people from away who make a choice to come to these towns, and they make a choice to raise their families there. Or in the example of the teacher that I talked about, Franny, and of the English teacher, for example, who is in the book, they made a decision to come there as teachers slightly later in life, and they came from Long Island, from other parts of the country, from California. And they found Downeast something, yes, to work for in helping these kids, but they also found community. As do, I would argue, a number of the immigrant families who have come as migrant workers with their children and made the decision and the choice to stay and raise their children. And I spoke with a number of young women who were of those immigrant families, who said, all of them said, my parents made that choice because they believed that this community had something to offer, and that these folks from away and these folks from multi-generational families, it's not perfect, but they are working side by side within the community to help build something better. I know I didn't answer all your questions, but you did sort of strike a chord with that one particular piece.
I'm gonna reach back a bit in the chat. One of the first questions, who was it from? Was from Linda, and Linda's asking about dating, and the young women share the story of their boyfriends and their partners, and it's fascinating to watch these young people making their way in the world. Did you have did they say anything to you that you didn't include, or we're looking for a little, what's the insight? How do they feel about dating in Downeast, Maine? We want to know. Dish the dirt.
You want to dish the gossip a little. Well, I'll say this. One thing that was interesting was there was definitely a mix among the girls. That I think that for some of them, the Downeast boys were. They were right there with them and very committed to dating and potentially marrying a young Downeast man. And then for others, and I think about Vivian, it was interesting. There's one young woman in the book that I haven't mentioned, Vivian. And she comes from a pretty established Downeast family. And she is the rebellious one. And she goes through this period. She's actually best friends with Willow, and Vivian's family at one point takes Willow in when Willow really has nowhere else to go. And Vivian is all about rebellion as a teenager, and she is off, sneaking out of the house and dating these young men, and doing all sorts of things that you would think about as a young rebellious teenage girl. And her family is quite religious, and they're in the Baptist church, and there's a lot of tension there. And she just loves these boys. She loves them. And what's interesting, though, is that she ends up meeting and now on the road to marrying a boy, not from Downeast, but from Holton. And I remark that she's now up at University of Maine at Fort Kent, and she's living in Holton. And it's, a lot of the things that she railed against in her small Downeast community are very similar to what she's now living. So there's something in there. It was really interesting, though, I would say on a final note, to also see the way in which there's a real competitiveness around these young women who are fierce, right? In the best sense of the word, with the boys around them. And I think again about McKenna and the way in which she says, she dates young men from Downeast, and she's right there with them, but she is also right there lobster fishing right by their side, and kicking ass, as I say in the book, and as they say. And she loves them, but she's also determined to beat them at their game, and that's fun too.
That is fun. And yeah, that spirit definitely comes through. You mentioned briefly religion, and I'm curious about your observations, if you have any, about the role of faith in these coastal communities and with these young women. I know it really mattered to some of them. Is there I know we're dealing with a small sample size, but you talked to some other young women and you were in the communities. Do you have any observations about the role of faith in these rural communities?
Yes, very strong overall. There are, as anyone who knows these communities, there are a lot of churches, right, per population. But I think that the demonstration of the strength and of the faith of these young women, by and large, was much deeper and broader than the sense of what church did they or their family belong to, if any at all. What I found was that to a young woman, whether it was through organized religion or whether it was through a faith that was found in their communion with nature around them, that sense of connection to faith, to religion in the broader sense of the word, ran through very deeply. And there were moments, for example, in the case of one young woman who is the valedictorian, Josie of the class, and she goes on to Yale, second ever in Narraguagus High history to go there, the first being her older sister. There are moments when these young women, as Josie did, wrestle with their faith and wrestle with the way in which the organized strictures of religion seem to be butting against what they generationally are experiencing. And in Josie's case, what she is experiencing with 1 foot Downeast and 1 foot in New Haven and at Yale, and the secularism that she is bumping up against, having been in and of a extremely strong family of faith. She wrestles with them, but through it all, she still maintains a very, very deep and, I think, thoughtful and self-possessed sense of what it means to be of faith and to still be able to question. And I thought that the depth at in which all of these young women in various ways sort of had that in them was really fascinating and remarkable and worthy of note.
Absolutely.
John, I don't mind taking over asking some questions for you so that you can kind of think of other things that you might want to ask as well.
Well, I think, yes, please do. Please do.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Holly asks, are the girls you followed unique to the Narraguagas student community, or do you believe they represent an important trend for young women in Downeast, Maine?
I think that they represent an important trend, not just in Downeast, Maine, but more broadly in small towns. And part of the and in rural America, part of the work that I did, I spent about 4 years doing this sort of immersive reporting with these young women and the broader folks around them. But around the about a year before I started this, I spent a fair bit of time doing sort of back research, doing as much reading as possible, as much sort of talking to folks as possible more broadly around the questions of particularly young people in rural America, and then found these young women in an effort to sort of process that. In a more on the ground, right, human level way. So what I believe very strongly is that this generation of young women that I wrote about, and the broader group of young women that I also spoke with, whose stories are not told in specific, but I hope and believe are captured through this book more broadly, that they are representative of something that is going on more broadly in rural America. And that is that you have young women who are excelling, who are working through serious challenges, who are representative of progress, right? While still maintaining the value and recognizing the value of significant pieces of the legacy that they come from. And so they serve a bridging role generationally. And for those who make the decision to stay, and there are many who do, and take on more leadership roles as they mature in their 20s into their 30s, what I believe we will continue to see more of is that bridging, is that bringing their own sensibilities and their own sense of what progress means, right? While still honoring their grandmothers and their great-grandmothers and their great-grandfathers and their mothers, and all that embodies that legacy of what I call that, Downeast / rural fierceness in the best sense of the word.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a good couple of questions that are follow-ups sort of to that response. Did any of the girls not included in this book feel excluded or express a desire to be included? And then secondarily to that, are there any concerns or conversations that have been had or raised about protecting the privacy and anonymity of the women that you talked about and their families, in their community?
Yeah, I have not heard from the young women that I've spoken with whose stories were not told. I have not heard personally any discontent, and I very much hope there's not. And I really felt in very strongly that every one of the young women and the young men that I spoke with more broadly, it was such a gift from them to spend any amount of time with me. And I am so grateful to them for that, because it took that broader set of conversations to form the foundation for what ended up being essentially the story of these young women and their community. And so I am grateful to them for that. And then the question of privacy was a critical one. And from the beginning, I offered anonymity to the young women. And from the very start, I will tell you that particularly it was especially important for Willow, that for her safety, for her privacy, that maintaining a pseudonym for her was critical. And for some of the other young women, I think it was less so. But it was interesting because they all know each other. And they all knew that within their community, at least some of them would be known, right? But in some ways, even if they weren't concerned about themselves, they all were looking out for Willow in particular, and almost wanted to do this in a sense for her. And I thought that was really just such a great symbol of the way in which these young women, who are not all tight friends, right, but they all know each other, the way in which that was a metaphor for this broader theme that I keep returning to, of the bond of community, the strength of community, and the way in which neighbors do look out for each other and folks do look out for each other. And the way in which I would add, even though it is so geographically isolated, in so many ways it kept striking me that it was so much less isolated than one might feel in a high rise in the middle of Manhattan, right? And I thought that was an important piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Holly has actually an appendage to her question. She's mentioning that, you know, Washington County is the poorest county in Maine with large amounts of alcoholism, poverty, diabetes. Where did you see the Narraguaga students and their families fit in this profile?
So there were a lot of challenges, a lot. And there were kids at Narraguagas. There are kids who don't have running water. There are children who have parents who are addicted to opioids, and they have not lived with their parents for most of their lives. Poverty, as many of you know, childhood poverty is you know, hovering close to 30%. This is a tough place, and Narraguagas has kids that are right smack in the middle of that. There is no question. And I was mindful of that throughout the entire experience. At the same time, one of the things that I really wanted to do in widening this lens was to recognize those challenges, but also show the way in which the school, through the teachers, tremendous mentors, through the leadership of the school, through many in the community, that these kids, while they always will need more, and there always can be more that can be done, that there are folks really making this better and working hard at it. And nowhere do you see that more than in the Maine Seacoast missions work. You know, the EDGE program that I write about, and the folks who are there on the ground as part of the Maine Seacoast missions mission, right? I can't tell you, every one of these young women talked about the difference it made in their lives. Young men and young women who were not profiled in this book talked about, from the very first focus groups when I sat down with them, the EDGE program and the mission came up as one of those lifelines. And so I think it is also important to shine a light on the things that are working, that are particularly those from the ground up, that are working, and that, yes, could be better, could be doing more. Everyone wants to do more, but supporting those efforts and supporting those teachers and those mentors, and showing the way in which that makes a difference, I think is critical, not only for outsiders to see, but for the young people who are experiencing this to see that the story is not always about hopelessness and despair, right? That when they look at themselves, that they see reasons for hope. So that is, I think it's a great question. It's an important one, and it's an important area to make sure that we're understanding. And yes, Narraguagus has a lot of struggles.
Alyssa, I'm aware of the time. Does it make sense to begin to close?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was one question that I thought was interesting, if you don't mind me asking that final question from Linda. And then if you want to take it over after that, John, and then I'll wrap it up at the end.
Sure.
Linda asks, Gigi, what, if anything, do these young women say is missing from Downeast?
I'll try to keep the answer short. I will say on the surface, what they say is missing is a movie theater, restaurants with really, really great food, or more choice of restaurants with great food, and a little more nightlife, right? Right? That's what they say is missing. I think that, and I think in seriousness, I think that with all the beauty, and there is a lot of beauty, and with all the community spirit, and with the way in which we have men and women supporting these young women, dads and moms and uncles and everyone, that it is geographically isolated, and that isolation can get to all of these kids. And that finding outlets is another thing that's just really, really important, finding healthy and good outlets. And I'll leave it at that to keep it short.
Okay. I should follow up Gigi's generous comments about the Maine Seacoast mission by mentioning that you can learn more about the Seacoast mission at seacoastmission.org, and you can check out all our programs. And see what we're all about there. I wanted to go back as we begin to close the time here. I wanted to go back to Gary's question very early in the chat. I thought it was a great question. And it is, are you still in contact with these young women? And I'll add, and are there any updates that we should know about?
I am fortunately still in contact with them. And I'm so, we do a lot of texting, right? It's all about texting. And we even have a group text. So it's really nice to be in touch with them. And I very, very much hope that we'll continue to stay in touch for many, many years. And I am happy to say, and I know the time is short, that they are all doing really well. They're to a young woman, they are working on their degrees, but also working. The fishing is continuing, and the speech pathology graduate work is going on, and Josie is going into her senior year at Yale, and Vivian is about to finish her nursing degree up in Holton, and Willow is engaged to be married and working on the wharf and getting her business degree. And it's very gratifying to see that, and to see again that these young women, even if they don't stay down east, and a number of them are staying and building, that their hearts will always be of down east, and that bond, I know, will never be lost. And I hope our bond between the five of them and me will also never be lost, because it is, as I said, a great gift.
I've got one more question, and it is, how is the book being received? And frankly, we don't care about anybody who's not in Maine and not part of our community. So how is the book being received in Maine, and especially in our rural communities and down east?
I am so gratified that I have heard from members of the Downeast community, and more than I could have ever expected, that they are pleased, and I know how precious telling the story of this community and these young women is, and how important it was to treat their stories with respect and seriousness. And And I am very gratified at the response I've gotten. It means frankly more than any outsider reviews. It means more than anything to me to know that.
Great, thank you. And I would just close my portion here, turn it back over to Alyssa by saying thank you all for joining. Thank you, Gigi. And I want to encourage you to get this book. It's really remarkable. Lots of folks in the chat are saying that they love the book and they're either going to order it or they're going to go out and get it. I would point out, I've got on my shelf here, in honor of Left Bank Books, who's one of the sponsors, I've got my Left Bank books here. And I would encourage you, if you're in Belfast, to go by there and see those folks at Left Bank Books and get Gigi's books. You'll be glad you did. Alyssa, back to you. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with Gigi.
Yeah, and thank you so much, John. Gigi, thank you so much. Congratulations. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I just want to echo my thanks to all of you, to John, to you, Alyssa, to Emily, Left Bank Books and Bangor Daily News, and particularly to all of you who tuned in tonight. I am so grateful and so glad I had the opportunity to do this.
Well, really, we're thankful that you came on to talk with us a little bit about it. Give us some inside peeks of stuff that, those pictures and all of that stuff. It was fantastic. So thank you so much for that. And congratulations on the book. And yes, thank you to our sponsors, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and to the National Digital Equity Center, and specifically Left Bank Books, who are celebrating their 18th year as a locally owned independent bookshop. They are open year-round, 7 days a week. They take special orders daily and are happy to ship Gigi's book directly to you. So reach on out to them and they will get that sorted for you. But thank you all again. I appreciate it. Thank you everybody for coming. And I hope you all have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.